Marjorie Dreamboat Mace. Loris, people have varying feelings on the Tyrells. In both the show and books, we know the Tyrells as rulers of the Reach, never kings. However, that doesn't mean they didn't marry into a monarch, nor that they were absent of any royal blood. So this video, let's talk about the history of House Tyrell. House Tyrell has a sigil featuring a golden rose on a field of green. Their house words are growing strong. Depending on who you talk to, some don't think that's the strongest of house words.
Growing strong. Ha! The dullest words of any house. Winter is coming. Now that's memorable. We do not sow. Strong, strong those are houses you watch out for. Dire wolves and krakens, fierce beasts. But a golden rose growing strong? Ha! That strikes fear in the heart.
During the time of the books and show, their seat is Highgarden, or was in the case of the show, but they have an interesting history that begins well before the books and show. So let's go back some 4,000 to 6,000 years before the time of the books, when the Andals started their invasion of Westeros. In part 3 of the Reach, I talked about this invasion, so I'm just going to summarize it here, because the super details of that event aren't very important to this video. So again, some 4,000 to 6,000 years before the time of the books, the Andals started their invasion of Westeros, where once they had called Andalos their home, with the growing conquest of the Valyrians and knowing slavery was only a matter of time, they fled to Westeros where they knew they were free and able to worship the Seven. Due to where they landed, the Vale took the hardest hit from them. The first men with their bronze weapons could not withstand the iron weapons and armor of the Andals, and slowly the First Men kingdoms fell. Again, not all, but most. The Andals would continue to spread, war, and carve out their own kingdoms. In some areas they were repelled, in other areas they dominated, and in other areas words were used to make peace and join with the Andals. Due to where the Reach is located, it shouldn't be surprising that the Andals came to their land late in the game. Surely the Andals knew of the wealth and power of Highgarden and the fertile goodness of the Reach, but there was a lot of land and kingdoms between the Andals and them. While their longships had first landed on the shores of the Vale and then along the eastern coast, the fleets of the Arbor and Old Town had barred them from the Sunset Sea and Redwine Straits. So we see the location of the Reach gave the Gardener Kings and their people a huge advantage. They could observe what happened in the Vale, the Stormlands, and the Riverlands, learning from those realms' mistakes and battles. The people of the Reach had heard of some First Men kingdoms attempting to ally with the Andals to take out rival First Men kingdoms, and the disaster that resulted from it. Because of this, those of the Reach made no attempt to ally with the Andals to take out other kingdoms. Instead, different Gardener Kings prepared in their own ways. What is important for this video is that by the time the Andals reached the Reach, the 3 Sage Kings, Gardener Kings that ruled the Reach one after another during this time, decided to use a policy of accord and assimilation rather than put up a fight. This worked out beautifully. The last of the Sage Kings, King Gwaine V Gardener, brought one Andal adventurer, Alliser Tyrell, into his service as a champion and sworn shield after Alliser showed incredible skill at arms. Alliser Tyrell was the founder of the Tyrell line, and because of him and going to the Reach and serving Gwaine the Gardener, one day the Tyrells would come to rule the realm they originally chose to serve. So Alliser coming into the Gardener King's service paved the way for his sons to get closer to the Gardeners. Though Allister's eldest son became a well-known knight and later died in a tourney, his second son, named Gareth, while never becoming a knight, was incredibly smart and bookish, and instead of being the king's champion and shield, chose to serve as a royal steward. The Tyrells descend from Gareth Tyrell and reaped many rewards for his intelligence and service of the Gardeners. Choosing books instead of a sword was perhaps the best choice he could have ever made. Gareth was such a great royal steward, and likewise his son Leo, that the Gardeners decided to make the office of High Steward hereditary. That meant the Tyrells had an in and would remain close to the Gardeners as their stewards generation after generation. Over the centuries and generations of Tyrells, many of them became trusted advisors and confidants to the Gardener Kings of the Reach, at times even acting as Castellans in times of war. During King Garland VI's Gardener's rule, One Tyrell even ruled the Reach as a regent before the boy came of age. The Tyrells would keep getting high praise from their kings as they performed exceptionally. King Giles III Gardner, a pretty impressive guy in his own right, described the Tyrells as "my most leal servants." But one Gardner king finally took his appreciation of the house a step further. It's a bit of a story, but that's what you're here for, right? So King Garth X was a bit unfortunate in only having daughters. Not in a sexist sort of way, but in a other houses made a thing of it sort of way. King Garth had married one daughter to Lord Manderley and his other to Lord Peake. House Manderley and Peake both wanted their wives to succeed as Queen of the Reach because then, of course, they'd be kings of the Reach. This desire led to a lot of bad things happening, which eventually escalated to open war between Lord Manderley and Lord Peake, with other houses taking different sides. Garth X was too old and feeble and mentally gone to really understand what was happening at this point, and lost territory to the Storm King and the Rock during this time. Sadly, the Dornish also took advantage and not only sieged Old Town, but sacked Highgarden, chopping House Gardner's legendary throne, the oaken seat, into pieces before burning it. King Garth was found tied to his bed, covered in his own filth and whimpering, and the Dornish slit his throat, took Highgarden's wealth, and then torched it. This led to a decade of absolute chaos in the Reach. While we don't know the exact details of what the Tyrells were doing during this decade of chaos, finally, after a decade of anarchy, it was a High Steward that came to the rescue. Sir Osmond Tyrell led an alliance of 40 houses to put down the rebellions, retook the ruined seat of the Gardners for them, and placed Mern VI Gardner, a second cousin of Garth X, as king. Mern wasn't the greatest king though. He was a man of modest gifts and relied on his stewards, Osmond and later Osmond's son Robert Tyrell, and then Robert Tyrell's son Laurent Tyrell, to help him rule. With the help of his mighty Tyrell stewards, King Mern the Gardner was able to rebuild Highgarden and restore power to House Gardner and the Reach. Understandably, King the Mern VI was so happy with the Tyrell's service, he wanted to give the next generation born the honor of claiming descent from Garth Greenhand, the legendary figure of Reach which most of the houses claim descent from, at least the first men houses. Marrying Sir Robert Tyrell to his youngest daughter, finally the Tyrells could boast that they had royal blood in them. Not only royal blood, but the blood of Garth Greenhand. Despite only being stewards, 9 more marriages between House Gardner and House Tyrell would take place over the centuries. I've heard the saying, you don't fuck the help. Well, apparently the Gardners didn't take that advice. The Tyrells would continue to serve the Gardner kings as their faithful stewards until Aegon's conquest. While I've gone over the conquest in excruciating detail in many videos, for this video it is only important to know that the last Gardner king, King Mern IX, died resisting Aegon the Conqueror, and the Tyrell steward and family stayed back at Highgarden to watch the castle. There might be some dark rumors that the Tyrells encouraged the Gardners to go to their doom and face Aegon, but those are just nasty rumors, of course. When Aegon came to Highgarden to secure the Reach after decimating House Gardner, he didn't meet any resistance from House Tyrell. Instead, Harlan Tyrell, the current steward, opened the gates of Highgarden with the Targaryen approach and pledged his family and himself to House Targaryen. As Aegon had said a few times, those that surrender and bend the knee would be rewarded, Aegon did just that. He rose Harlan Tyrell up as Lord of Highgarden, Warden of the South, and Lords Paramount of the Reach. Some maesters believe the fact that all other houses of the Reach had taken up arms against Aegon on the field of fire but the Tyrells helped in part with Aegon naming them to this position. Now they say that, but the Hightowers also famously didn't help, and they had a stronger claim to Highgarden in a lot of respects, which leads into this next part. As you'd imagine, other houses in the Reach were not happy with House Tyrell now being in charge of their realm. Despite having royal blood in them through marriages with the Gardners, other houses of the Reach viewed them as up-jump stewards, and became incredibly bitter that their far nobler blood that had closer ties to House Gardner, were not given control. Despite their protests, Aegon did not budge in his decision, and House Tyrell remained Lords of the Reach. Aegon the Conqueror, despite a disturbing amount of people that think he was a poor ruler, made a fantastic decision in picking the Tyrells as wardens of the South though. When Aegon continued his conquest and went to war with the Dornish in 4 AC, the Tyrells were quick to answer, which it should be noted the Reach and Dorne already didn't like each other, so that helps. Lord Harlan took his army to the deserts of Dorne during King Aegon's first Dornish war, but sadly in 5 AC, when marching with his army from Hellholt, Harlan Tyrell and his entire army simply disappeared. In a super spooky way too. Skeletons in the desert spooky. Harlan's son Theo Tyrell then became the new Warden of the South. Knowing what happened to his father, or rather not knowing exactly what happened, but that his army just disappeared, Theo wasn't too thrilled to join in the Dornish war with Aegon. Despite his hesitation to further attack Dorne, Theo was forced to engage in war when the conflict spilled out beyond the Red Mountains. At last, in 13 AC, Aegon made peace with Dorne and the fighting came to an end. For now. The Targaryens would continue to try to bring Dorne in from time to time until they were finally folded into the rest of the Seven Kingdoms through marriage. But when Aegon made peace with Dorne in 13 AC, Lord Theo decided it was the perfect time to take care of the displeasure of other houses in the Reach, with the Tyrells being wardens of the South. He consolidated Tyrell power by arranging a council of maesters and septons to examine and finally dismiss other houses' sometimes persistent claims to Highgarden. This successfully led to the Tyrells becoming the most powerful lords of the realm. And maybe that wasn't so bad. They did a lot of good. We know that during the reign of King Jaehaerys I Targaryen, the Tyrells hosted the tourney of the Field of Roses, and that's considered the greatest tourney in a generation. Throughout the rest of the reign of the Targaryens, House Tyrell would remain faithful and, as ever, fulfill their duties, coming to the aid of the Targaryens and fighting under their banner on many occasions. But they also withdrew support from some Targaryens, and waited to give soldiers under certain circumstances. When Maegor the Cruel, Aegon the Conqueror's son who stole the throne from his nephews, reign was coming to an end as his people wisely turned against him, the Tyrells followed others to stand up for Maegor's nephew. After Maegor lost his Targaryen family hostages, some of Maegor's Kingsguard disappeared, and Maegor lost his entire royal fleet. Of course. The Tyrells had to be careful about upsetting kings with dragons. Other vassals of the Tyrells would follow suit after the Tyrells withdrew their support from Maegor. Interestingly, the Tyrells would sit out on a lot of infighting between Targaryens. Just like they did little to no helping with the fighting between Maegor and his nephew Aegon, the Tyrells did not play a part in the Dance of the Dragons, a terrible Targaryen civil war that was fought between 129 AC and 131 AC. Despite it being thought the Tyrells would align the Reach with the Greens. And people had thought the Tyrells would side with the Greens because House Hightower, the assholes that helped start the war, had vested interest in seeing King Aegon II on the throne as his mother was a Hightower. As King Aegon's side was the Greens, you can see what was happening there. However, it turned out that wasn't the case. Lord Lionel Tyrell had been a baby at the time, and his mother and Castellan smartly chose to keep Highgarden out of the bloodbath, remaining neutral during the war. This unfortunately had the result of splitting the Tyrell bannermen who fought on both sides of the war, not only the Greens but the Blacks. Lionel not taking place in the war, because, you know, he was a baby, was deemed by some to make him a traitor. Ulf the White claimed that he should have Highgarden because of this, but that didn't work out for the White because of a case of being murdered by a Hightower. But the Tyrells would become involved in the Targaryens' wars again in 157 AC when King Daeron I Targaryen came to the throne and decided Dorne was unfinished business. Lord Lionel Tyrell, now a man, commanded the Reach's army to invade Dorne via the Prince's Pass. Though he was faithful, some considered him to have acted too boldly, perhaps trying to make up for his house not fighting in the Dance of the Dragons. Because of Lord Tyrell's bravery and zest, King Daeron I appointed Lionel as governor of Dorne after his initial victory. Now, if you know your Reach Dorne history, you know they absolutely hate each other. Lionel, oh boy, he did not help that hate. While he moved from one keep to the next to keep peace in Dorne, chasing rebels and making sure the Dornish were in general being little good boys and girls, he kinda got douchey. He decided wherever he stayed, he would sleep in the Lord of the Keep's chamber and also fuck women in it. Don't go into other people's bed and fuck women. That's just rude. One night at Sandstone, he made the mistake of doing the same. In a bed with a heavy velvet canopy, he pulled the sash near the bed to summon a wench. The Dornish were counting on that. Instead of a wench, the canopy opened and 100 red scorpions fell on him, killing the man. Lionel's death resulted in revolts, and in 2 weeks, Dorne was free again, leading to King Daeron I's death. Thankfully, Lionel Tyrell had children, and the Tyrells continued as Wardens of the South. Though not many notable Tyrells are named by the Maesters, Lord Leo Tyrell, nicknamed Leo Longthorn, is perhaps one of the most well-known and is regarded as one of the finest knights ever produced by House Tyrell. A tourney champion, he was considered the finest jouster to ever hold a lance. Even Prince Aegon Targaryen, one day to be King Aegon V, and Sir Duncan the Tall recognized him as a challenging opponent that Dunk should avoid. Leo Longthorn won distinction during the First Blackfyre Rebellion, having won against Daemon Blackfyre supporters in the Reach. However, Lord Tyrell was not able to get his forces to the Battle of the Redgrass Field, where Daemon Blackfyre died. Lastly, we all know the elegant and wonderful and oh so dashing Mace Tyrell, who became Lord of Highgarden, Warden of the South, when his father rode off a cliff while hawking. I'm sorry, it cracks me up every time. Some claim maybe it wasn't an accident and he did it to get rid of his wife, but I'm not gonna be that mean. It was an accident. During Robert's rebellion, Mace sided with the Targaryens and took command of the Reach's army to march against Robert Baratheon. Although Randyll Tarly achieved most of the victories before Mace arrived, Mace is given credit for defeating Robert at the Battle of Ashford. Mace also led the siege of Storm's End, but was unable to take it due to Stannis being the Manus he fucking is, and holding the castle. When Eddard Stark rode from King's Landing after the sack and arrived at Storm's End, both Mace and his closest bannermen surrendered and stopped the siege. Due to Robert Baratheon being very forgiving to people that weren't Targaryens, after the rebellion and once Robert was king, he forgave the Tyrells and let them keep control of the Reach. Mace would continue to loan money to King Robert as requested. Interestingly, Viserys Targaryen believed that House Tyrell was one of the houses that would rise in support of him if he landed in Westeros. Now, when we begin the books and show, House Tyrell was still in support of King Robert Baratheon I. But as we know, things can change quickly when you play a Game of Thrones. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and come back for more videos.